We're Daled Amud Aleph 4a, and we started last week discussion on the chazis. So let's get into that. It's the last word on the seventh to last line on the page. So the Gemara begins by quoting the Mishnah, and the Mishnah says like this: when it comes to a bika, comes to a field where there's no requirement, and we discussed last week or 2 weeks ago at length about even if there's a minhag, even if there's no minhag, meaning no minhag to build and no minhag not to build, then you don't have to build any wall by a bika. And therefore the Mishnah says, but if one wants to build a wall, he goes into his own property, and he builds, and he makes a chazis to indicate that the wall belongs to him. So that year later, if the wall falls, or if something happens, the chazis will be proof of who it belongs to. Namely, you who put it up in your property. So the Gemara now gets into my chazis. We basically ended there, because we ended with the Rashi, which describes the word chazis. That's where we ended last week. So the Gemara says, my chazis, what's a chazis? Rav Huna says, he bends the top of the wall outward toward his friend. And that's where Rashi commented on the word chazis, which just dawned on me to add to our list of questions. Why doesn't Rashi explain what the word chazis means on the word chazis? Why on the word akafi l'karna levar, which is the description, that you bend the top outward? Stop, add that to the questions. Anyway, okay, so now the Gemara, this is where we left off last week. So it says the Gemara, why bend the wall outward toward your friend, the Nevin Milagov? Why not bend the wall inward toward you? Why outside towards your friend? Says the Gemara, there's a problem, because Avid Chavre Nami Milavar, because if you're going to bend it inward, then your friend will bend it outward. That is to say, the neighbor will bend it toward himself. In the same way you bent the wall toward you. So you did that to prove that it belongs to you. The neighbor is going to do the same thing to his side of the wall. And then when he does that, there'll be basically a bend on either side. And therefore he'll claim, it's mine on yours, however it is. It's both ways. If I bend the wall toward me, then my neighbor could do the same thing on his side. And then there'll be a chazis on either side. And as we learned in the Mishnah, there's a chazis on both sides. It's indicative of the fact that it belongs to both of them. So in order to avoid that, I make the ben lechatchila on my neighbor's side. And that way, if it's bent towards my neighbor, it's proof that it's mine. And that's it. The guy can't come to my side and build the thing on my side, obviously. The Gemara says, if so, if we are concerned for such a scheme where the guy's going to build a chazis on his side, so why not be worried? I built the wall and I bend it towards his side to prove that it belongs to me. So maybe he's going to cut off that part. The part which is bent towards him will cut off and it'll end up being straight. And if it's straight, then there is no chazis at all. And I'll say it belongs to both of us. Because either if there's a chazis on both sides, or if there's no chazis, we assume it belongs to both. So you're stuck either way. If I bend it towards the other guy, if I bend it towards me, then the other guy's going to build on his side and bend towards him, and it'll be a chazis for both people. And if, as Rav Huna initially suggested, I bend it outward towards the other person, and the other person just straightens out the wall on his side, and the chazis is gone, and now there's no proof that it belongs to both, belongs to him, belongs to me, I mean. Says the Gemara, Gizuza midayade. If you cut down the protrusion that's coming onto your side, if a person cuts down the chazis on his side, it's very noticeable that it's been cut. It won't have the same smooth finish. It'll be clear that it's cut, and therefore there's no way of avoiding it. Okay, so this is the Gemara at this point, where the chazis bends outward towards my neighbor, and in this way, the neighbor cannot do anything to undo my chazis. He can't add a chazis because the whole chazis to begin with is on his side. So he can't come to my side and add another chazis. And he can't take away my chazis because if he takes away, if he cuts it down, it'll be noticeably that it's cut down. Let's see Rashi. So Rashi, the word here in Rashi is va'ovid mavrai, as opposed to the language we have, which is ovid chavin am melavar. It's a different girsa. There's a little hagoyis v'tzunim here on the side. So what does he do? How does he build it on his side? Right. So the Gemara said that the reason why Rav Huna says to build the chazis pointing to my neighbor is because if I had the chazis pointing toward me, my neighbor will make a chazis on his side pointing towards himself. And then we'll end up having a wall with two chazis, one on either side. And if there's a chazis on either side, then he'll claim it belongs to both of them equally. And therefore make the chazis pointing to your neighbor's side and you avoid the issue. So now Rashi gives us the technicalities of how a person builds a chazis on his side. When I build a wall, and let's just say I was going to build the wall with the chazis pointing inward, as the Gemara's suggestion is. So I build the wall, I can do whatever I want. I can shape the wall as I wish. Now the wall is built, the other guy's got to build a chazis onto an existing wall if he wants to do the scheme, right? So how does he do that? So explains Rashi. He bends the head of the kaisel. How does he do that? How does he bend the head of the kaisel? He attaches to the top of the wall avonim stones, v'tit and cement, umabeyu and thickens it. And that's how he makes a chazis. So I build a wall, and the wall is shaped such that it's bending towards me. And the guy on the other side just adds a bunch of stones, cement, smooths it out, and it makes it look like it's a chazis facing on his side. That's how Rashi explains it. Yeah. So I just want to point out, this seems obvious right now, but I'm pointing this out because later it's going to become a little less obvious. But right now I'm pointing out that last week, when Rashi described me making the chazis pointing to my friends, looking at Rashi before, all he said was, Rashi HaKoisel, the heads of the Koisel, Yachav L'tzad Chavera, he bends to his friend. Whereas over here, he talks about this whole thing, you have to add stone. And the reason seems to be very simple. Because when I'm building the wall to begin with, I do whatever I want. I shape it in such that I'm bending it towards my neighbor. But if the other person is going to build a chazis on his side after I built my side, then he has to add stone. It's obvious I'm pointing that out because we're going to see later Rashi is going to say something which seems to be a bit different. So I'm just pointing that out now. Okay, so this is a simple Gemara so far. Anything not clear, please interrupt me.
Which is the Rashi that you just read?
The Rashi just before that, Mekafi L'kaina Lavar.
Oh, the one that you were...
Now, which one?
The new one now was which?
Va'ovid Mavrei. So it's not the same Lashon our Gemara. Our Gemara says, Ovid Chavinamim Lavar. But it's the same thing. Basically, this is the counter argument. Why you're not making the chazis point towards you, because if you make the chazis point towards you, your friend will make a chazis pointing towards him, and then the wall will have two chazis. So how does he make a chazis pointing towards him? Explains Rashi, because he adds stones, adds cement, thickens the wall, and makes it bend towards him.
Moshe, it's not, you're having trouble finding it because it's not bolded in mine either. It's at the end of that same Rashi.
Okay. So actually in the footnote.
To the bottom of the previous Rashi.
Yeah. So I should have known that. In the footnote here that I have, and the Goy Sumi actually makes that remark, that in the old prints, that's what they did. They didn't make it bold because they got mixed, because Rashi has a different girsa, and they didn't know this other girsa in the Gemara. They assumed that Rashi was just continuing a conversation from before. But now that we found this other girsa, we know Rashi's commenting on the next piece in the Gemara. That's what they actually say in the footnote. So I guess in your Gemara, the older Gemara, it's not boldened. But it is another Dibra Masel, according at least to the Goy Sumi here. Okay. So let's go back to the Gemara. 3 lines on the bottom of the page, the second word. So Ikadamri, there are those that record the same conversation in the reverse. So the conversation we had now was, Rav Huna said that you make the chazis pointing toward your neighbor. And the challenge was, why not make it towards you? To which we answered, if I make it towards me, my neighbor will make it towards him, and then we have 2 chazis. And you're concerned that if I make the chazis pointing towards my neighbor, then my neighbor's going to cut the chazis down, leaving the wall with no chazis at all. Said the Gemara, if you cut it down, it's noticeable. Now the Gemara gives another version to the same conversation. Ikadam, the other said like this. Amar Rav Huna said, make for the kind of Lagav. that you point the top of the wall towards you. Rav Huna's statement is that the chazis faces you. And the Gemara asks, it's the same conversation just in the reverse. The neved milavar. So why not make it point outward? Why make it point towards you? Make it point outward to the other guy. The Gemara says you don't want to do that because guys lei chavre. Your friend's going to cut it down. And if he cuts it down, he's going to say that it belongs to both of us because there's no chazis. Because he cut it down. It's a scheme. Says Gemara, if so, if you're concerned with the neighbor scheming and cutting down the chazis that you made point towards him, then why not be concerned? Maybe my friend is going to add a chazis on his side, right? Because in this version, Rav Huna says to make the chazis point towards you. So if you're worried your neighbor's going to scheme, maybe he's going to make a chazis point towards himself. And say, it belongs to both me and you, because there's now two chazis. Says the Gemara, lifufa, I think that's how to pronounce it. An extra chazis made the yadeh is recognizable. And you can see it's a fake chazis. You can see it's not part of the original building. So this is the Gemara. Two different versions of Rav Huna. Either Rav Huna said make it towards, so there's a machlekes here, at least the surface of this, there's a machlekes of what is noticeable in a change, right? The first version was make the chazis point outward. Why make the chazis point outward? Because if you make it pointing inward, then the other guy's going to make a chazis pointing towards him, and it's unrecognizable. But if I make a chazis pointing outward, and the other guy cuts it down, it's very recognizable that it's cut. So a cut in the wall is recognizable. An addition to the wall is not recognizable. That seems to be the different versions here. An addition to the wall is not recognizable, and therefore if I make the chazis pointing towards me, and my neighbor makes an addition to the wall to make the chazis point towards him, it's not recognizable, and it'll look like two chazis, and therefore we won't have any proof of who it belongs to. Whereas, as Rav Huna's suggestion is in the first reading, I make the chazis pointing towards the other neighbor, and if the other guy cuts it down, it's very recognizable that it was cut, and it won't do the trick. The other version says the reverse. Make the chazis point towards you. Because if a guy goes and tries to add a chazis on his side to make it look like two chazis, an addition is very recognizable that it's an addition to the wall and not part of the actual building. Whereas, if I made the chazis pointing towards the neighbor, and the neighbor cut it down, he can cut it down in such a way that it's very smooth, and it won't be noticeable. So this is the two versions in Rav Huna. Let's see Rashi now. Okay, this actually is from earlier. The neighbor will claim it belongs to both of us. As we learned in our Mishnah, if we make a wall between two people, you make a chazis on both sides. This is the halacha in a bika. If you decide to build a bika, if you decide to build a chazis, a wall and a bika, and both neighbors agree to do it together, and you put a chazis on both sides. So by this guy adding a chazis on his side, he'll claim it belongs to both of us. And the Gemara said, the Gemara said that perhaps we should be concerned in the first version of Rav Huna, that if I make the wall pointing towards him, and that's the chazis that's pointing towards him, maybe I should be concerned he cuts it down. So it says Rashi, to this bend, which is pointing to his side, he'll cut down. The Aman, as a result, he'll say, it belongs to both me and you. And we didn't do a chazis. Even though the halacha is you're supposed to do a chazis, we didn't do one, and it belongs to both of us. And he gets away with that because he cut down the chazis pointing into his property. To which the Gemara said that when you cut down a chazis, it's recognizable that it was cut. Then the Gemara said in the second version that milagov. The other version was right. The second version was you point the top of the wall milagov to his side. So it translates Rashi letzad shaloi, to his side. It must be that in Rashi's version, this is the first time the word milagov comes up. Because in our version of the Gemara, the first time the word milagov comes up is in the previous version of Rav Huna, where the Gemara asks, why not do it milagov? But Rashi doesn't translate the word milagov over there. Rashi translates the word milagov in the second version of Rav Huna, with tzad shaloi, to his side. Right? The Gemara. Yeah, I don't know why Rashi translates it here. But anyway, later the Gemara is going to ask that the Mishnah says you make the chazis be b'chutz on the outside. And if you're pushing it towards yourself, it's on the inside, not the outside. So the Gemara is going to ask that in a moment. Okay, then the Gemara said like this. La yiflei. The Gemara said, right in the second version of Rav Huna, where Rav Huna suggested, Rav Huna said, I'm not suggesting, he said that the chazis is to be made toward your side. And the Gemara asked, why not make it to the other side? Said the Gemara, because the guy's going to cut it down. If so, why aren't you worried that if you make a chazis pointing towards you, the other guy's going to make a chazis on his side pointing towards him? Why aren't you worried about that? The word the Gemara used there is la yiflei. That's the word that the Gemara said. So says Rashi, la yiflei, mechaber chazis acheres litzidoi. He adds a chazis on his side. Now here is what I wanted to point out. Because as I mentioned before, the simple reading of the Gemara is that there's a dispute between these two versions as to what is recognizable. When you add a chazis, is that recognizably in addition to the property? And therefore no one's going to believe that your additional chazis is a real chazis. Or is when you cut down recognizable that you cut it down, right? If I made the chazis pointing outward in the first version of Rav Huna and the neighbor cut it down, it's recognizable that it was cut down, and therefore we're not going to believe you that it belongs to both people. But the language the Gemara uses in the first Iked Amri, in the second Iked Amri, to describe my other, like in the version where, right, because each Iked Amri has both versions. Each version of Rav Huna has both versions, but one of them is accepted and one of them is rejected, right? Each version of Rav Huna includes a scenario in which I make a chazis facing me, and includes a scenario in which I'm making a chazis facing the other guy. But just the question is which one we reject and which one we accept, right? So when the Gemara describes the making of a chazis on my side and the suspicion that my neighbor might make a chazis on his side, the Gemara uses different language. In the first version of Rav Huna, it says va'avid ma'avrei. That's Rashi's version. Or even in our version, where the Gemara says avid chavrei nami min lavar. Whereas in the second version, when the neighbor makes a chazis on his side, the Gemara uses this language of layif. So why the change in language? Why the change in language? And does a change in language indicate a different description, a different process of how you make the chazis there? And I'm saying this because of the way Rashi describes it. So in the first version, where the Gemara says "Avid midab mavrai," at least this is Rashi's reading. He adds stones and cement, and he thickens the wall, and thus making a point towards him. Whereas in the second one, he adds an extra chazis. I don't know for sure, but I'm just putting it out there. Is that a different description for how you make the chazis on your side? Or is Rashi just translating the word layifle? That you add a chazis on your side. How do you do that? Go back to what I said before.
Koife makes it sound like it's the same wall, right? In the first version?
It is the same wall.
No, but it makes it sound like you're not adding. But then he says later on, right, in the same Rashi, he says that you're mechaber, so it's...
Right, as if I'm making the wall come to my side by adding stones and bricks, or adding stones and tit and cement. Ma'avei, when I thicken the wall. But over here it says mechaber chazis, as if this chazis is a thing that exists and I just attach it to the wall. So the only reason why I would say there's a change in building it, because then it's not a machlekes and metzias. Meaning like, because otherwise there's like a machlekes here. When you cut down a chazis, is it recognizable or not? Or when you add a chazis, is it recognizable or not? Well, I mean, the facts are on the ground. Go check it out. Is it recognizable or not? And I suppose it depends on the architecture, right? And maybe that's what Rashi is alluding to, in that in each version, it's a different process of adding the chazis, and therefore the removal of the chazis is either more obvious or less obvious. Right? Which is why in the second version, where the additional chazis is recognizable, it's because it's mechuber, it's added. Mechaber chazis acheres. He attached another chazis. It's too recognizable. Whereas in the first scenario, where he adds bricks and mortar and just thickens the wall, how is it recognizable? The whole thing was brick and wall, brick and cement. This could be a complete fantasy of mine, but I don't know, maybe. I'll leave it to your discretion. The only problem with my little svara here is that the poil, there's still a machlekes in Metzius about what happens when you cut it down. Right? Well, I guess no, it depends on what kind of chazis you have. If you have a proper chazis where you add bricks and you thicken the wall in the first version, then when you cut it down, it's not recognizable. Right? Whereas in the second version, where you're attaching a chazis, whatever that means, then taking it down is not recognizable, but the addition is recognizable. Right? So maybe that's what Rashi's trying to do here, and maybe that's what the Gemara itself is doing. The Gemara itself, by changing the language of how the chazis is added by the other guy, maybe he's telling us that there's a different process of attaching it, changing what it looks like if it's there or if it's cut down, and making which one recognizable and which one not recognizable. Okay, I'm not sure if that's clear. If it's not, again, this is my own fantasy, so welcome to reject all of that. Okay, let's look at Tosafos. So Tosafos said, oh no, sorry, we didn't get to Tosafos yet, sorry. Let's first learn the next four words and then we get to Tosafos. The Gemara asks, now in this second version of Rav Huna, where the person's chazis is facing inward, and the addition of a chazis on the other side would be too obvious, and therefore no proof. Now that seems not to jive with the language in the Mishnah, which says, Oisa chazis b'chutz. You make a chazis from the outside. Whereas l'chura, in the second version of Rav Huna, you're making the chazis inside. Facing you, says the Gemara, kasha, this is a kasha. Question. Now let's see Tosafos. Vami b'chutz katani, kasha. Now this is a kasha, but tiyufta eina. It's not a tiyufta. So what's the difference between kasha and tiyufta? And for that, look at the pictures I sent you today. The first and second picture. So this first and second picture, okay, look at the second picture first, because in order, that's the way it is. These pictures come from what's called the Mavoi Hashas.
The new ones or the ones that you said that you sent before,
No,
and said what we were referring back to?
The new ones I sent today. The new ones I sent today, it's from the Mavoi Hashas. The Mavoi Hashas is an introduction to Shas written by Shmuel HaNagid. Shmuel HaNagid is one of the early Sephardi writers, and very prolific writer. And it's printed in the back of every standard Masechta Brachos. There's Mavoi Hashas. B'chlal, I'm a very big fan of reading introductions. It gives you context for lots of stuff. And I very much recommend reading the Mavoi Hashas. It's not very long. It'll take you less than an hour to read through the whole thing. And what he does there is he explains what is Mishnah, what is Brisa, what is Tosefta, and then he goes through all these various different terms the Gemara uses. Kashya, Tiyufta, Maskif, Rami, Sugya, just defining the terms so that when you see these terms, you know what they are. It's printed in the back of every standard Masechta Brachos. And on the side, they even give examples. You don't have to read all the things on the side, but if you read even just the Mavoi Hashas, it would be very nice. Okay, so there he defines the difference between Kushya and Tiyufta. And he says like this, Kushya yimachlikis haba al shvois. A Kushya is a counter argument presented on some statement. But the arguer, the one who's asking the question, isn't trying to disregard a established halacha. He's just asking a question. He's challenging. Now, if it's many people asking one or one person asking many, the language changes from plural to singular between meisvei and eisvei. That's what a kasha is. Okay, so a kasha is a challenge where someone's trying to challenging an argument, but not necessarily is he trying to uproot any halacha. He's just challenging. Now, piruk is a response. Who pirush akusha is to pirush means like to straighten out the question. And therefore, if there's no dispute comes as a result of this, then that would become the halacha after the answer. Now, the next picture, or the first picture I sent you, what's the yufta?
Just adding by the mesve at the end there.
Oh, changing the language between mesve and esve, the way kushya is introduced. And it's either in the singular or plural, depending on who's asking who.
They would say mesve and then kushya?
No. Oh, mesve is a kushya.
Right.
A mesve is a kushya, even though, by the way, kosha and mesve is different, because usually mesve means the person asking the question is going to ask a question from a source greater than the one talking, which is consistent here, because we're asking a question from the Mishnah and the person talking is Rav Huna, who's from the Gemara. So usually mesve means as opposed to kosha. But anyway, he's just saying mesve is an introduction to a question. And depending on either if it's singular or plural, it's either mesve or esve. Okay. Now, what's a tiyufta? Tiyufta here, mabatelas halacha. The tiyufta is to uproot the original questioner, the original statement. Not to challenge the original statement, as was with esve or mesve, but tiyufta is to uproot. The person questioning is actually trying to undermine the statement. Raya brura with absolute proof. And if the halacha would follow, not the question in dispute, because that's, in the kushya, in the mesve and esve, where the challenger is not necessarily trying to uproot the halacha. Maybe the halacha will stand. But the tiyufta, where the questioner is trying to uproot the original statement, then if he brings a good enough proof, he will uproot the halacha. Okay? And that's what Tosafos says over here, that even though the Gemara does not resolve the question, but the Gemara doesn't say tiyufta. The Gemara says kushya, meaning it's a kasha why it says mibachutz, but it's not a tiyufta. It doesn't completely uproot the halacha. And this is what Tosafos explains. Now, how is that? Why is it not a tiyufta? This is a good raya. So says Tosafos, the tiyufta eina. It doesn't completely uproot the original statement. The matzina l'meiner, because you could respond to the question by saying, I know that what does the word mibachutz mean? Not on the outside of the property, but shaboilet chutz l'chayma. It pops out of the wall, as opposed to outside the property. And therefore, if the chazis is facing inward, even though it's not outside of my property, it's still outside the wall. And therefore, the language of mibachutz is not entirely contradictory to the idea that a chazis is pointing inward. And therefore, it's not a tiyufta. Because you could translate the word chutz to mean outside the wall rather than outside the property. And outside the wall does apply to a chazis pointing inward. But nonetheless, it still remains a kasha, even though it's not a tiyufta. Why? The imkain michutz. It should have said michutz rather than mibachutz, meaning oisa chazis bichutz. You make a chazis outside rather than mibachutz, from on the outside. So because the question only comes down to a letter base, it's a kasha, not a tiyufta. That's what it seems like Tosafos is saying. Okay, right there in the Gemara. So this was Rav Huna. Rav Huna said the chazis is a protrusion. And either it's a protrusion inward or protrusion outward, depending on the two different versions of Rav Huna. But Rabbi Yochanan says, Neshaya ba'amsa malavar. You smear cement on the outside, on the top amma. You see Rashi? On the top. Yetach betit amma b'rosh hakoisa b'buchutz. You should smear the top half, the top amma of the wall on the outside. If you have the Rabbeinu Gershom on the right side, then you can see even more clearly. Amma malavar, sha'amal yoina miyasid oisa besid. The top amma he covers with cement. Al pnei kula along the whole thing, along the whole length. Hakois al the wall, b'chutz tzad chaver on the other guy's side. So it's a very, very clear indication. I make my side nice and your side ugly, basically, by smearing the top amma with cement. And that's how I prove that it's mine. Says the Gemara, the Mevid Bilagov, why not smear cement on your side? Why on the other guy's side? Very simple, right? Because if I do it on my side, then my friend's going to smear cement on his side. And he'll say, belongs to both of us. If I smear the cement on my side, I'm leaving his side exposed brick. He can wake up one morning, take cement, smear it on the top, and claim that it belongs to both of us. Says the Gemara, if you're concerned with someone scheming and adding cement, why not be concerned? Hashnami de kafale. Maybe he'll peel off the cement I put on his side. The kafale chavre. The friend will peel it off. Like Rashi says, mekapale, mekafle. He peels it. Not sure what changed from the Gemara's language to the Rashi's language. Oh, see, I thought so. That's what it is. The lamed should be before the fei. Mekalfoi. Translating mekapel to mekalfoi, putting the lamed before, meaning that it means, that's how the Goy Sabach changes the Rashi. So otherwise, Rashi is just repeating the same word. Mekapel, mekafle. What's the difference? But Goy Sabach puts the lamed before. That's how you usually say peel, kiluf. Okay, anyway, the bottom line is, if I'm concerned with my friend scheming and adding cement on his side, why am I not concerned with him peeling off the cement I put on his side, rendering it chazisless? That's a word. And then I'll say, and so the Gemara, peeled cement is obvious. And a guy who tried to peel cement never comes out looking good. And therefore, it'll be clear that it belongs to both of us. Okay, so question for you. Is Rabbi Yochanan arguing with Rav Huna or giving another option? Rav Huna says...
I go with B.
Huh?
I go with choice B.
That he's giving another option.
Yeah.
And you say that because?
Because it just sounds like a different interpretation of how to make a chazit.
Yeah. So let's look at the pictures I sent last week, the Rosh. The first picture. Look at the first lines, and you would be right, at least according to one opinion. Okay, so it says the Rosh there. This is the first picture that I sent last week, the one I responded to. We'll just look at the first few lines, and then we'll get back to the rest of it after we finish the Gemara. Okay, my chazis, what's a chazis? Rav Huna says, the kayif lekainim belavar, you push the wall outward. So he passes like that version of Rav Huna, that you push the wall outward rather than push the wall inward. Now, Rabbi Yochanan says, the shaya ba'amsa melavar, you smear an amma of cement on the outside. So the Rosh goes with the outside is the way to go, but he quotes Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan. Then says the Rosh, it seems to me like Moshe is arguing, the lepliga adadi. Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Huna are not arguing. They're just giving two options how to make a chazis. The point is just to make legit proof in the building of the structure that indicates it belongs to you by making it uglier on the other guy's side, making your side nicer, making a point to him, making the cement on his side. Okay, so no dispute. But Rabbeinu Chananel Kosav, Rabbeinu Chananel writes the pligi that there's a dispute. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, Rav Huna's chazis is no good. Upasak and he paskins to Rabbi Yochanan, like Rabbi Yochanan, that the only way to make a chazis is by smearing cement on the other guy's side. Now, so that's the Rabbeinu Chananel. So now says the Rosh, and according to Rabbeinu Chananel, what's the essence of the dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Huna? This would be the dispute. Rabbi Yochanan is of the view, Gizuza lo yoda, that a person cuts down the chazis, it's not recognizable, right? If we pass him like the first version of Rav Huna, that the proper way to make a chazis is by making it point to the other guy's side. So Rabbi Yochanan says that's not a good chazis. It's not a good chazis because the neighbor's going to cut down the protrusion on his side, and no one's going to know it because he can get a really nice sanding machine and sand it down to the point that no one's going to know. That's Rav Huna's view. That's Rav Yochanan's view, which is why he says you got to smear the cement. But Rav Huna, which says you have to make the protrusion and rejects Rav Yochanan's view, Savar, he would have to be of the view that kulfa lo yada, that if someone peels off the cement. Okay, so we were in the Rosh, and the Rosh just said that in his opinion, there's no machlekes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Huna. It's just a question of options, whereas Rabbi Chananel said there is a dispute, and the dispute is which one. Rav Huna is of the view that someone peeling off the cement, he could do such a good job that it's unrecognizable, and therefore he says build the chazas pointing outward. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says that a person can cut down a chazas pointing into his property, and he can do such a good job that it's unrecognizable, and therefore better smear cement. Okay, now back in the Gemara. Now the next shtickle in the Gemara, there are some like just technical things that I want to share with you that are like a little bit unsettled with me, and hopefully we'll work this out together. So I sent some pictures that hopefully will give us some clarification rather than more confusion. So let's look at the Gemara first, without even looking at Rashi. Let's just look at the Gemara before we go into Rashi. Says the Gemara like this: 4 lines in the top, second to last word. Daled and Beis. Hutza. If a person makes the wall in the bika with the pegs, with the spikes in the ground, right? The hutza v'dafna. So how do you make a chazis there? Because the versions of chazis we talked about till now is in a wall, where you're building brick pointing outward, or you're smearing cement. That's all with a brick wall that has cement. But what if I'm making the wall with hutza v'dafna? How do I make a chazis there? Amar of Nachman says, Sinufe yarche melavar. Literally, it means the points of the rows outward. We'll go b'pashtos, the way Rashi seems to be saying b'pashtos, that the top of the sticks, you bend them outward facing your neighbor. The word snufi comes from the word sniff, as in like the edge, or like a subcategory, right? That's like the end of something, the addition of something. And yarchi, as we're going to learn in Rashi, also means row. Yeah, and melavar means the outside. Okay, so you point the edge outside. Now the neved milagov. Why not make it pointing inward? Why make it pointing outward? Says the Gemara. Your friend is also going to point it the other way. And he's going to say it belongs to both of us. Okay, so if we're concerned that my neighbor, this is the same kind of conversation. If we're concerned that the neighbor is going to scheme and make the chazis point in my direction, to make as if there's a chazis for both sides, hashnami gayas, maybe he'll just cut down my gazis, this sadile, and throw it out. This is the first time the Gemara adds this word sadile. Before, when the Gemara said you cut it down, the Gemara doesn't say v'shadile. You cut it down, period. What do you do with it? Who cares what you do with it? You cut it down. Now the Gemara adds v'shadile. You cut it down, dispose of it. I don't know why that's there. V'amar, and will say, the DVD who belongs to both of us. Says the Gemara, no. Mishrik le betina. You smear these tips that are bending towards your neighbor, and you'll smear it with mortar. Tina is not not tit. It's tina. It's mortar. Okay, so now we're adding mortar to this hutza v'dafna on the top to make the chazas pointing towards my neighbor. Maybe my neighbor's going to come and peel off the cement I put onto the top there. So the Gemara made the yadin. Peeling cement off the top of sticks is too obvious, and it won't be done properly, and it'll still be a good enough chazas. Abaye says, so this is Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said to make this kind of chazas, where the sticks are bending to my neighbor, and then you add cement there, okay, or mortar. Abaye says, Hutza less letakanta. If you make a wall of hutza, you have no way of proving it belongs to you. Ela b'shtara, you have to have a shtar, a contract proving that it's yours. Okay, now let's go to Rashi, and let's try to dig into this. And my biggest problem, the thing that's bothering me most about this chazis is that, and I think this is what Rashi is trying to address. But again, the floor is open. I'm not 100% sure on it, and we're going to look at other things. We'll look at the Ben Gershom, we'll look at the Rosh, we'll look at other things here. If we're talking about, when you're talking about a wall, right? So Rashi explained how the neighbor can add a chazis on his side. I have a bending to my side, and he adds, however you translate layif, whether you're saying it's a different version of adding a chazis, so the same one, but it's a thick wall, and you're adding materials to make the wall like a chazis on your side. Think of the technicalities. I put sticks in the ground, and I bend the top towards you. What are you going to do? Come and bend it to my side? How do you do that? It's bent, like there's not enough play. We have a thick wall, so you can have it, either not bent anywhere or bent both ways, right? But in this first version of Rav Nachman, where you put it into the ground and you make the tops point to the other guy's side. So how does the other guy make it point to your side? Like, how does that work? Technically, how do you do it? So, and I think this is what's bothering Rashi, I think, because let's just see, you see there's a long Rashi here, Rashi adds a line and certainly adds a few words that are not clear. So let's see Rashi. First, Chutza. Right, that's the Gemara introduces this new sugya by saying Chutza. If they made the wall with these nitzarim, with these branches, how do they make chazas? So said Rabbi Nachman, I'm sorry. Snifi yarche levar. The edges, the snif of the yarche of the row, levar to the outside. So let's Rashi say, Roshi hahotzim, the tops of the spikes. Over here it says yeshev, but it should be yisav. That's the Hagoy Yisab. Bach changes it? Who changes it? Yeah, it should say yisav with a samach. The tops of the sticks are bent, yisav, litzad sadach havere, towards the side of his friend. Right now, this seems to be clear, but then Rashi adds more. Now, when he is soinef, when he makes these sniff, when he makes these edges of the hoitzin, when one stick's ends, and he's putting in the next stick, he should make the sniff on the outside. What is Rashi saying? What's Rashi saying? What was wrong in the first line? Finished. Make it bend towards your friend then. No. Now, what? What's he saying? So I was thinking that maybe this is what Rashi means. That soinef means, like, let's just say the stick is, let's say it's 3 inches wide, right? So at the top of the stick, you make it come to a sniff. You make it come to a point. Now you make it come to a point. You're shaving off till it comes to a point. So he's saying like this: make the point come on the other guy's side. So which means my neighbor's side is going to be straight, and my side will be a point like that, right? Because I'm being soinef on his side. I'm making the point go to his side. Rashi says, when one ends, like coming to its point, then you should make it point to the other side. And that would explain how my friend can come along and do the same on his side. By shaving down on his side, he'll just make the point a little shorter, but then it'll be a point in the middle, as opposed to a point on his side like that. Maybe that's what Rashi's saying. But the 3 words that are bothering me is the yitin es chaverai. Take those words out. What's missing in Rashi? Rashi hotzim yisev letzad tzadach chaverai. Ukshi yisoinef hahotzim kishichala echad yisnafen buchotz. When you're making the tips of these things, and you're making it to go to a point, when you're ending one, kishichala echad, one's ending, then yisnafen buchotz, you should make it go to the end. What's the yitin es chaverai? And you're putting the other one in. What's the next one in Negeya? And what if you did it after you put the other one in? Well,
if it's built like a patchwork kind of fence, so it's like a warp and a woof. It's like a weave. So the chaver is the one that's interwoven.
Interwoven. Maybe actually. Okay, I was thinking of a different direction, but maybe. Let's look at the some of the sources I sent you today. So let's look first at, since you mentioned that. Where is it? Oh, sorry. The one I sent you last week, the last one I sent you last week. It's after the Rosh. Oh yeah, it's not clear. Missing a word there. So look at the last picture. There's a small little strip with 2 lines. It says Rosh on top in square brackets. So there's missing a word there, but it says like this. Pirush bein shuris hakonim, between the rows of sticks. Yechaber eitzim dakin. He should attach little pieces of wood. Which are pointing the other way. So this seems to be what you're saying. You have these little sticks in between. Maybe they keep them together, and those sticks are pointing towards your neighbor. Maybe that's what it means. And interesting, but the problem is the first line in Rashi. That's his first line. Make the tops, the heads, the Rashi, the tops, pointing towards Yisa, bent towards your friend. Unless it's 2 things like you're saying. Separate thing, 2 separate things. First of all, make it bent towards your friend. And when you make these, maybe that's not what it means. Then what is the word translation of the word soinef? What is the translation of the word soinef then? I'm not 100% sure. I don't know. But look at the, I sent you a picture here. That's the one I sent you today. The last one I sent you today comes from the Papula Charifta, which is a commentary on the Rosh. So look at the letter Shin. Look at the letter Shin. So the word in the Rosh, the word that we have is Snufi Yarchi Melavar. But the Rosh had the word, where is it? The Sonofle Datzi Lavar. He had the word Datzi rather than, like we have it, Yarchi. So translate the Papula Charifta. What does the word Datzi mean? It's like de'atzi, like that which, atzi means like, atzi, that which you stick in. Va'ayin, and the letter ayin, nivlas, is swallowed up in mifta in its pronunciation. So it's a silent ayin. Datzi. Okay, what does it mean? Vehem Rashi Akanim, these are the heads of the sticks, but which head? Shenoyetzim oisam. The ones you stick into the ground. Lavar, and that's be pointing outward. So this is interesting. If I'm reading this right, maybe I'm completely missing this. But this is the heads of the stick that you put in, right? Doesn't mean he's talking about the.
But you added that it's in the bottom though. No, yeah, it's just it's stuck in. But why is it the bottom now?
Because which side's stuck in?
If you have an existing partition, you stick it into the like it's I don't know how they make the fence, but once it's made, just sticking things into it to point in a direction.
No, but you're sticking into the ground. You're being noyatz into the ground, right? You're sticking the stick into the ground.
I could be noyatz into the mechitza. I have some mechitza made of wood, branches, whatever, and I'm sticking into that lattice work.
Read the sentence and translate it for me. These start from the Rashi Karnim. In the Papula Charifta, there's comment here.
Okay. Rashi Karnim. These are the ends of reeds of branches. Shenoyatzim oisam, that you wedge them in lavar, so they point to the outside.
Wedge them into each other.
It's that they are noyatz into whatever exists already. So you have something made of chutza, whatever that is, some kind of fence of wood, branches. And it's standing in the air, and now it's into that fence, branches that point outside.
Okay. So you're saying that he's saying the same thing as we saw in the Shit in the Kebetzes? Maybe. Okay, I was thinking something else, because the word Shenoitzim Oisim can either be a description of the sticks, like this. Rashi Konim, the heads of the sticks, which are stuck into the ground. But we're not talking about the side that's in the ground, we're talking about the side that's sticking up on top. Or, in other words, Shenoitzim Oisim is a description of the Konim, or the description of Rashi. Rashi Akonim Shenoitzim Oisim. It's the heads that are being stuck in. As if to say, when you make the spikes, that you're going to be right, the bottom of the, right, and I was talking about before the points at the top, but the bottom has to be a point, so you stick them into the ground. When you make that point pointing to your friend. So when the stick falls down, you can lift it out of the ground and say, look, you see it's pointing towards you. I don't know. Maybe it's completely wrong reading also. Again, it could be Shenoitzim Oisam means a description of the sticks, not the description of which side of the stick. But if I'm right, that it's talking about a description of which side of the stick, as in the side of the stick that's being stuck into the ground, and that's where you make the hook, that's where you make the chazis. I don't know, it's not. Maybe that's what I said. Rashi says, V'iten es chaveroi, because you're about to put the other one in as if like you have to stick it into the ground. I'm mamish not clear. So I'm putting out all my thoughts on down here because I'm mamish not clear on this.
If you would stick it into the ground, then means lavar, means you're putting a extra row in the ground on his side.
Why is it an extra row? You have to stick the sticks in the ground so they stand up, right? Now, when you make like Rashi says, when you make the point, when you make like the point at the bottom of the stick that needs to be stuck into the ground, you make that point on his side, pointing towards him as opposed to in the middle or pointing towards you. Like shave the bottom off in such a way that it's pointing towards him. Yeah,
I don't see how that can fit with this. Like, if someone means to make it pointy. I'm saying if we understand the what is this? The Pula Charifta is that you're putting them into the ground a certain way.
Yeah.
And then Rashi says when you're sign of them.
Yeah.
What do I need to sign up them for once they're stuck in the ground, the outside?
Right. Because you sign up for Haitzim, because Shechala Echad on one end. Shechala Echad on one end, Vitnes Chaverei, and you put the friend, put the other stick, you Safina Bochutz. Unless, like you're saying, the word Soinef means to like weave them. And then when you weave the sticks together, when one ends and you put the other one in, then you should make that weaving point to the outside. Maybe that's what it is, Taka.
Right, which would also fit in then that you are.
Yeah. And when you're done with one stick and you're putting the next stick in to be weaved, so make sure that stick is pointing towards the other way. Maybe. And the word sniff doesn't mean the head. But then why is the first half of Rashi saying, why is that Nagea? So there's two chazis here. One is the fact that it's pointing towards the other side, and the other one's the fact that I'm weaving sticks the other way.
It's a further explanation. It's adding explanation, because if I leave you with only the first line of Rashi, it's very unclear. Like, how does one point sticks that are going to snap in half? Like,
I don't know. They're a big stick. Let's say they're 4 inches, 5 inches wide, and the top is shaved off like that, round to the pointing the other way. Like that's what Rabbi Gershom puts it. If you have Rabbi Gershom, he says,
where in the Rabbi Gershom?
If you have it on the side of the Gemara, I have it on the side of my Gemara. I don't know if you have it. Most Gemaras have it on the side. Mine's on all the way.
Yeah, but where does it start though?
The Sonafle. There's one Naisha, then Kafil, and made the Yadeh, Hutza, then the Sonafle. Ribi, he has the word Ribi, not even Yarchi, a different word than we have. A few different words. Like in Rashi, we thought it was Ditzi. In Rashi, it's Yarchi. In Ribi, it's in Rabbi Gershom, it's Rivi. And he says, which again, my question becomes, if the only chazas is the fact that the sticks are bent towards the other guy, then what does it mean the other guy bends it back to me? How do you have a chazas on both sides if the stick is bent toward the other person? He bends all the sticks the other way. Unless it's talking about the shavings at the end of the stick. Like, are the shavings in such a way that it's only shaved on my side pointing up to his, or it's shaved on both sides coming to a singular point in the center? That's what I think Rashi is talking about. I think. But I'm mamish not clear on this. So, if you guys have some clarity, I'll take it.
I don't follow the lesson of the Rabbi Gershom. I don't understand all the words there.
When it comes to the gadol, I think it means the height. When it comes to the height of the hutzah, the chavin, he should have his intention to have a ratio that the top should be the hutzah of the hutzah, kaifi bent, lavar to the outside, to the side of his friend.
Right, so it makes sense when you do that with brick and mortar, because you can manipulate it any which way you want. When I'm working with wood, it's not some, I can't move it around. Like it's going to snap in half. It's going to be.
Yeah, but you shave it. That's why I'm thinking you shave it that way. But actually, interestingly enough, this I just noticed now. Rashi said when the next line is right. The Gemara says the friend will also make the gazes on his side by pointing it the other way. Right. So the Gemara said what you'll do is you'll put cement, right, to hold it in place. The other guy can't bend it back. But how does the Rabbi Gershom say? To cut it down. As if to say, it's not a question of the other guy making it bend back into your side, but rather the person cutting down your gazes. Because you made the gazes bend onto his side, he'll just cut it down. But by putting cement, he can't cut it down. But the lashon in our Gemara is that the friend is Ovid nam michavi melavar. The friend is also going to make a hutzah, make a chazis on his side, pointing to me, I guess. No, sorry, how does the Gemara? Yeah. That if I make the gazes point towards me, he's going to make a point towards him. How he does that, I don't know. Rashi doesn't explain. Like if I were to make it pointing towards me, how does he all of a sudden make it pointing towards him? So oh no, sorry. I misunderstood the Bnei Gershom. Bnei Gershom is talking later, where the Gemara does say guy is late. I'm sorry, disregard my last comment from the Bnei Gershom. That was wrong. Because the cement is coming to substantiate when I push the gazes fainting, when I push the chazes pointing towards my friend. Whereas my question is, in the original scenario, I'm pointing it to my side, right? When I'm pointing it to his side, the Gemara says, why not point it to your side? And so the Gemara, you make it bend back towards you, because he'll make it point to his side. And that's my question. If I'm making the sticks point towards me, how does he all of a sudden come and make them point towards him? And you know what? Even if we're talking about the shavings, it's also difficult to say he came onto my side and shaved it down to make as if it's pointing to his side. It's very fair. I personally have a hard time understanding this.
Well, if you're sticking in additional sticks.
Oh, so yeah. So if you're going with the Rosh, which says that you're adding a different stick, then the other guy could add sticks too. You're right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Because the Gemara is saying that if you're koifel it, if you peel it off, then that's recognizable. Right? And then the conclusion both times. And when the Gemara says you're worried that your neighbor will copy you or will cut it off, but saying that the conclusion is kulufim miyad, the idea that's known.
Because if I put cement, once I put cement and the other guy has to peel it off to make his point, then it'll be too recognizable because I put cement there. But till then, the Gemara assumes that it's doable until the cement point. So whatever the sniffy is before you put cement is doable for the other guy. Right? It's only the cement that's preventing the other guy from undoing it. Not clear. Maybe we should look at by Steinsaltz's translation. I didn't even look at that. Should have done that. Let's see.
Uh-huh.
Let's look up his translation and see what he says. He directs the tips of the branches to the outside. And somehow you can make it bend back towards his side. And unless I have cement, the guy's going to manipulate the wood. It's I'm having a hard time understanding it. Okay, let's finish these last two Rashis here and we'll conclude with that. So first of all, there's a Haggah, which translates the word Yarchi. Yarchi, the word Yarchi, Kitamin Le'il, is the same thing as what we said before, where we described the wall, which had two half bricks, and in between the two half bricks, you put cement. And then the Gemara says, Tefach Yasera, the extra tefach between the two things is Lebene, and the little hay there it should be Yarchi. Lebene Orve, Lebene Yarchi, meaning the row in between. So the word Yarchi means a row, okay, between the rows. And this Taf Mem Shin, the little footnote here tells us, it means Talmidoi Shimon. This is a comment from the Talmud of Talmidei Morenu Shmuel, not Shimon, Shmuel, which is basically the Rashbam, Talmud of Rashi. Okay, Rabbi Chananel Pirush, Rabbi Chananel explains. Pirush means to say, Moitzi Rosha Kunim V'Dafnim. He takes the heads of the sticks of the Hotze V'Dafnim. Shohu HaKonim HaOmdim L'Chizak HaMechitza. It's like what you were saying. These are the sticks that aren't the actual partition, but it's the sticks that are there to hold up the partition. And you put those l'chot to the outside. Okay? So this is Rabbi Chananel. Similar to what you were saying, not the actual sticks, but the sticks that are there to support the sticks. Maybe it's what's weaved in or something on the side. So Metoch Pirush, from his explanation, says the Rashbam, mashbats implied, that we're talking about the sticks that are placed on the side to hold up the wall. And that is placed on the other guy's side. Sniffin, and that's what the word sniff means. As in that which is secondary. It's a sniff to the actual wall. It's that which holds up the wall. So maybe it's like those, like like you have a wall and you have like beams holding it up like that on an angle, and that you put facing toward the other side. I suppose something along those lines. Final Rashi.
That would make more sense how you're adding plaster to sticks.
But how do I have permission to put sticks on his side of the property? It's his property. I can't make sticks putting into his property to hold up my wall. How do I do that? I can't do that unless it's like this. You know, like you have a bunch of panels, and then you have a stick going crosswise to hold the panels in place. So I can put those on the outside, on his side or on my side, unless that's what he's talking about. And if I put it on the other guy's side, and I'm keeping my side nicer looking, because on my side all I just see is flat panels, and the crossbeam, which is holding the panels up, is on the other guy's side. Maybe that's what this Rabbi Nachman is referring to. That would also make sense. Because if I put it on my side, the other guy's going to go nail it on his side.
That doesn't explain how it would be a support, though. It's not on contacting the ground. There's no support there.
You're right. It's not contacting the ground, but it's keeping them together. In other words, if all they were doing was stick them into the ground, then they would wobble away from each other. So
that's what we said before.
Yeah, so you were saying before weaving, but instead of weaving, it's something on the backside. But
I'm saying you were saying that noyats. You were saying it's noyats into the ground.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking from the Papula Charifta. That he means the side of the stick, it's actually stuck into the ground.
So how can you put it on facing him is because the Mishnah says
the point facing the side. Yeah, and I'm making the bottom of the point to stick into the ground, and that point is facing his side. Again, I could be completely fantasizing here, but I'm still just.
If you make a support for the wall,
so
there's, like you're saying, the wall is standing up straight, and the support is going out to the ground.
To whose side?
And that in the end into the ground is towards his side.
How do I have permission to put sticks on his side to hold up my wall?
It's your side, but it's facing his side.
Oh, so I bring it, or you're saying I bring the whole wall in 1.5 feet away from my end property line, have it facing his side into the ground, but it's really still on my property.
Yeah.
And that's what koines l'tei shaloi is. He goes into his side, he brings it like 1 foot in to give him enough place for the support in the backside. Even though the Rashbam says side, you put it on the side. I guess the side means like on either side of the wall rather than the sides. Yeah. That's good. That's clear. That's definitely not what Rashi's talking about, but that could work in the Rabbi Hanano. Yeah, that could work in the Rabbi Hanano. Okay, the last Rashi here. Abaye said that with Hutzah, there's no such thing as Chazis. You have to have a star. What would the star say? He says, Rashi, El B'shtara, Imasa Echad. If one person is the one that paid for the wall in this bika and he paid for the Hutzah, then Yavi Edim, he should bring Edim, the Yachtim Ulai, and they should sign saying, we here testify that so-and-so built it on his side. So it's not a star between me and my neighbor. It's a star it's a star in which witnesses testify that they see that I paid for the wall and built it. Now, and if both of them did it, it's an interesting detail in Rashi. Why is Rashi adding the next part? Something to think about. And maybe next week when we look at the Rosh, maybe we'll get some insight as to why Rashi is adding this line. Now, if both of them did it, again, they have to have Edim. Edim should come and testify that they saw both of them give expenditures and both of them build together. V'yachtim will sign. Now, why is Abaye saying this? The Svirlik, because in Abaye's opinion, kul for the tina, mi'elu hutza. If I were to peel cement off the top of a piece of wood, lo yada, no one would notice. I can do a clean job. So Rav Nachman suggested that I put cement on my hutza to prevent my neighbor from undoing it, because if he peeled it, it would be too noticeable. Says Abaye, no, you can clean up very nicely, and that's the machlokes here. So there's a few things to point out. Maybe we'll talk more about that when we get to the Rosh next week. But just since we already learned the first part of the Rosh, here's the first time, right between Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Huna, Rashi didn't comment and say that Rabbi Yochanan is telling you to put cement on the outside because he thinks that Rav Huna is faulty. Doesn't say that when he switches to Rabbi Yochanan. But over here, when Abaye argues with Rabbi Yochanan, here he does say, because Abaye is of the opinion that he disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan. Right? And the reason is Because Abaye doesn't just say, Omar Abaye, you should write a star. He says, Hutza less letakanta. There is no solution. So Abaye is clearly disregarding Rav Nachman's solution. But does that mean, therefore, that the way Rashi is reading the Gemara, he agrees with the Rosh, that Rabbi Yochanan is not arguing? Because Rabbi Yochanan didn't say anywhere, Les takanta de chazis, unless you do like I say. Right? So there's a change in language, which maybe would support the Rosh's opinion, and maybe the Rashi falls in line. And we're going to see more when the Rosh goes into the halach over here, also bringing up machlekes about this. Maybe Rashi's line about the fact that the Eidim are there, not just when I do it myself, but even when both of them do it, they have to have Eidim. So why do they have Eidim there? If there's no raya that belongs to me, it automatically belongs to both of us because it's between the two of us, right? Like the Gemara said, Pshita is between the two of us. Of course, it belongs to both of us. Why do I have to have a star when it's between the two of us? When I'm doing it myself, I need a star because you're going to claim it belongs to half to you. But if we're both doing it, don't do any star. Just like you shouldn't do a chazis. But Rashi doesn't say that. He says, by his opinion, you have to make a chazis. You have to make the star even when two people are doing it together. So maybe we'll see that there's a shtickle machlekes going on here about what the requirements are if you were to build a wall in a bikkur. Okay, more in Mitzvah next week.
Oh, yeah.
Gute Nacht.
Night.